Welcome back, students. Today, we are going to discuss about the topic 1 of GE 122 Geodetic Surveying, which is the introduction to geodetic surveying and geodetic control networks establishment and densification. This is for the authors and contributors and for the copyright notice. For the outline of this presentation, we're going to discuss the review of the general surveying concepts and principles, geodetic surveying concepts and principles, review of relevant geodesy concepts, reference systems and reference frames, geodetic datum and reference ellipsoids. And lastly, the overview of the control surveys and geodetic control networks establishment and densification. This is for the intended learning outcomes. That after this lecture, you the students must have explained the relevance of general surveying concepts and principles in geodetic surveying, identified and explained geodetic surveying concepts and principles, identified and explained geodesy concepts relevant to geodetic surveying, differentiated reference systems, reference frames, and geodetic datum, and explain their importance in geodetic surveying. Identify different reference ellipsoids relevant to geodetic surveying, and lastly, explain an overview of geodetic control establishment and densification, including the role of geodetic surveying. So let's go now to the part 1 of this topic, which is the review of general surveying concepts and principles. Before ta magsugod, so na ako'y gi-prepare na picture. So, I hope na maka-relate mo. So, what is a surveyor? So, this is what the society thinks you do as a surveyor. No? You do the plans, magpaperma sa imo, magpabuhat og plano, and this is what your mom thinks you do. No? You are brilliant. No? Brilliant mo sa mata sa inyong ginikanan. It's because you are solving problems. So bright mo sa mata sa inyong mama. And this also the clients thinks about you. Wow, sana all daghang kwarta. Limpak na pera. And kung mag-survey mo, this is what kids thinks you do. Manag picture, camera, and what you are expected, or what you think imong dapat buhaton. So ikaw mag-manage, ikaw ang man sa mga tao nimo. But this is the reality. Mao day ni imong ginabuhat. Field, init, no? So ingana day ang life sa surveyor. I hope naka-relate mo ani nga na picture. So let's start with the definition of surveying. Surveying, na ay tulo ka klase diri ang gipakita, no? This is for example the lab activities of the student, and some of these are the actual field during the project. I think it's Geosafer. So surveying is all about determination of the relative spatial location of points on or near the surface of the earth. So I assume kabalo na mo anak balik-balik kinaon na ninyo. And surveying is measuring the horizontal and vertical distances, of course. And of course, also surveying is measuring angles between the lines, determining the direction of the lines, and establishing points by predetermined angular and linear measurements. And now let's recall the types of surveys. First, we have control surveys, topographic surveys, photogrammetric surveys, route surveys, construction or engineering surveys, mine surveys, hydrographic surveys, and lastly ang land surveys. So according to Dow 1998-12, land survey is a survey of land used for agricultural, residential, industrial, commercial, resettlement, and other similar purposes. So there are classification for land surveys. We have 3. So let's recall. So isolated land surveys, cadastral land surveys and geodetic surveys. Ang kaning isolated land surveys, kanina siyang mag-survey ta sa kanang matag lote-lote, no? Kanang property surveys nga ginagmay lang, no? And for cadastral land surveys, so this is the type of land survey nga nakadungog naman siguro ng mga cadastral, no? Cadastral land surveys nga municipal wide ang pag survey, no? And for geodetic surveys, so this is the establishment of geodetic control networks. And according to DAO 2007-29, so the updated classification for land surveys is the control surveys, cadastral surveys, isolated surveys, mineral land surveys, forest lands, and natural parks or protected areas delimitation surveys. So for isolated land surveys, according to DAO 2007-29, it is comprised of all classes of surveys of isolated parcels of land that is used for agricultural, residential, industrial, commercial, resettlement, or other purposes that covers the areas not more than 1,500 hectares. So in short, ginagbara jud siya nga mga survey kay it's because based sa iyang definition, less than 1,500 hectares. And there are classes of isolated land surveys. So these are the group settlement or and town site subdivision surveys, public land surveys, amendment surveys, private land surveys, government land surveys, conversion surveys, and other land surveys. So let's now define what is group settlement and town site subdivision surveys. So this shall refer to the subdivision of alienable and disposable lands that are not more than 1,500 hectares into 50 parcels or more. So isolated siya kaya it's because not more than 1,500, but it is for 50 parcels or more na mga subdivision of land. And when we talk about public land surveys, so it shall refer to all original surveys, no? Original, so wala pa siya titulo or wala pa siya na survey. So kamo ang first na mo survey to determine the boundaries of this one. So original surveys covering alienable and disposable lands which has not been subjected to private rights. Private rights, wala pa may nag-own, so dili pa siya subject for private rights, nor devoted to public use pursuant to the provisions of public land laws. And for the amendment surveys, it shall refer to the surveys covering the untitled, undecreed properties by changing the number of lots thereof without affecting the original technical description of the boundaries. So from the word itself, amendment, naalay o trohon, naka-i-change. Pero given na it is not titled or untitled siya. Next is ang private land surveys. So private land surveys shall refer to the surveys covering the lands claimed or owned by an individual, partnership, corporation, or any other form of organization which is undertaken for the purposes of original or subsequent land registration. So this is the normal scenario, no, na naimuluol sa inyong mga kliyente ang ipa-survey ang ilahang lote, kay ipatipak, ipa-subdivide, subject for land registration. For the government land surveys, it shall refer to the surveys of parcels of lands administered by or belonging to the national government or any of its branches and instrumentalities, which include friar land surveys, friar lands, state surveys rather. So, ang kanipod siya nga survey is ang nag-refer ni siya to the surveys of the lands purchased by the government, gipalit sa gobyerno from the religious orders and private corporations from the time 1904 hangtod sa 1913, no, for distribution to the actual occupants and bona fide settlers, no, and this act is pursuant to the Act, no, 120, otherwise known as Friar Lands Act. So gipalit ni siya sa gobyerno from the religious orders. and gipang-apod-apod ra pod sa actual occupants. And napod tay government lands Japan siya, pero under siya sa government land surveys, which is ang National Government Land Survey, no? It refers, no, actually to the surveys of all patrimonial properties owned by the government not intended for the public use. So naman tayo gitawag gud na property sa government, mo na siya gitawag og patrimonial property, no? So ano man sir, tanan man properties owned by the state man siya, no? Pero naman property na, like for example na foreclose na lote, no? Foreclose na lote from land bank, no? Let's say from land bank. So mapadulong na siya since land bank is owned by the government. So ang katong lote nga na foreclose, no, is patrimonial property siya, pero owned siya with state, but it is not used for the public use, no? Wala pa, dili siya gamit for public use. So patrimonial property siya. So kana nga mga lote pag i-survey na siya, ang tawag niya is National Government Land Surveys. Next is ang Local Government Units or LGU Land Surveys. It shall refer to the surveys on the lands acquired by the provincial, city or municipal or barangay government pursuant to the RA 7160 or other known as Local Government Code of 1991 and other pertinent laws which are not intended for public purposes. Again, mura dyan po siya patrimonial pero LGU, local lang siya na part. So another type of isolated land surveys is conversion surveys. It shall refer to the surveys conducted for the purpose of transforming or converting the lots covered by approved graphical cadastral survey, cadastral mapping, and photocadastral mapping into numerical or regular cadastral lots with computation and plotting in the system of cadastral project. So the link word here is the transforming or converting. So mao ni siya ang katong survey nga buhaton nga para i-convert ang katong mga na-approve nga graphical, no? Sa unang panahon manggod kay ma-approve man ang survey nga plain table lang siya na i-drawing lang siya sa unsay forma sa lote, pero wala pa siya i-approve na technical description, no? So i-convert to siya into numerical kay since graphical pa man to ang tawag sa una, no, na yung mga na-approve na graphical cadastral survey. So i-convert siya into numerical na cadastral project. And we have also other land surveys, no? It shall refer to the surveys made for the purposes of determining the limits and bounds of parcels not included in the enumeration above, no? Ato tong gipang discuss sa ganina, and intended for a specific purpose. So let's go to the definition of cadastral surveys. So, ano yung cadastral survey, sir? So it is a survey made to determine the metes and bounds of all the parcels within the entire municipality or city for land registration and other purposes. So mo na siya ang pangmalakihan, no? Kung anang pang municipal wide na jud siya or city wide na siya. I-consolidate tanan ang metes and bounds na magka-coincide tanan nga corner sa lote. So tulo ka classes ang cadastral surveys. So isa na ani is ang numerical cadastre, next is ang graphical cadastre, and public land subdivision or ang subdivision of alienable and disposable lands covering an area of more than 1,500 hectares. So since ang isolated is less than 1,500 hectares, si public land subdivision is 1,500 hectares, above na siya. So cadastre is a set of records, no, about parcels of lands consisting of a spatial reference and related information on the area, ownership or claims, value and use of land primarily for taxation purposes. So mao mo gini isa ka rason nga nung magpakadastral ang isa ka munisipyo para sa ilahang tax. So let's define numerical cadastre. Numerical cadastre refer to the cadastral survey wherein the bearings and distances of the individual lots are determined based on the computations based on the actual ground survey. So from the word itself, numerical, so naadjud siya computations, no, based sa actual ground survey. So si graphical cadastral pod is a refer to the cadastral survey wherein the bearings and distances of individual lots are determined using transit and stadya scaling from photo map and other graphical methods. From the word again itself, graphical, so mogamit siya og graphical representation such as photo maps, no, or mga aerial maps, mga captured using the using platform, no? So from the photos iyang i-convert into the parcels of lots, no? Para ma-determine ang iyang needs and bounds. So si public land subdivision pod, again, it's shall refer to the subdivision of alienable and disposable lands covering an area of more than 1,500 hectares. Sumpay ni siya sa kang isolated. And let's recall for the control surveys. Control surveys, again, unsa ning nga klase nga survey? Class. So si control surveys this is conducted to determine the horizontal and vertical positions of points with which will form part of the geodetic control or project controls over an area which is subsequently become the basis in determining the rectangular coordinates in an area. So control surveys, survey siya para magtukod kag imong kaugaling ng control station para mahimo pong basis sa mga pag-determine sa needs and bounds of lands sa isa ka specific area. So ang output ani niya is ang kanang gitawag na tong geodetic control station or GCS or geodetic control network. And we have also two classes for control surveys. We have geodetic control surveys and project control surveys. So let's define now the project control survey. So it is a survey that is conducted to establish the positions of points of reference for projects with a limited geographic coverage such as municipality, a large isolated tract of land, a group settlement, a barangay wide, and a group of municipalities, which is covering the primary control, the third order accuracy, and the second order control, which is equivalent to fourth order accuracy and tertiary control. So si project control surveys is mas lower nga part, no, sa lower siya nga part na accuracy. So ang iyang ma-establish ani nga geodetic control networks is or geodetic control points is lower accuracy kay since na naman siya sa third order, fourth order ng accuracy. So kay tungod ang iya pong coverage is for the gamay pod na areas, limited geographic coverage ra pod siya. So that's it for project control surveys. And when we talk about geodetic control surveys, sa higher level na po niya sa project control higher level of control surveys. It's because it's a surveys conducted covering extensive areas which take into account the curvature and the geoid spheroidal shape of the earth at sea level for the purpose of establishing basic network of control points covering the first and second order of controls. So sa kapangging ganina, higher na ni siya nga order sa control surveys. Mas dako na siya og accuracy. It's because it's a large naman ang iyang area nga gi-cover, so dapat i-take into account na gid ang curvature, no? Curvature sa earth. And again, first and second order control ang iyang ma-establish. So unsa nang first and second order accuracy sir nga controls? So for more information or for further readings, no, just read the Dow 1998-12 na dito ang mga specifications. So si geodetic control surveys is also called as geodetic surveys. Kaya again, so we take into consideration niya ang curvature and the geoid spheroidal shape of the earth at sea level. So another type of land surveys is the mineral land survey. So it refers to the surveys of mining claims, the quarry applications, sand and gravel applications, and other mineral lands within private or public lands executed for mineral agreements, permits, licenses, or for other purposes pursuant to the provision of the RA 7942, which is otherwise known as the Philippine Mining Act of 1995. So from the word itself, mineral land surveys sa mining kaning mga surveys is gina-undertake ni siya sa mga mining claims, sa mining boundaries nila, and for kanang quarry applications, kanang mga sand and gravel, limestones, and so on and so forth. So kanang mga surveys is under na siya sa mineral land surveys. Next is ang forest land and national parks or protected areas delimitation surveys. So it shall refer to the surveys conducted with the Regional Composite Survey Team or RCST or qualified private geodetic engineers in order to delimit on the ground the boundaries of forest lands and natural parks, protected areas from the agricultural and alienable disposable lands as delineated pursuant to Section 3 and 4 of Article 12 of 1987 Constitution, the PD 705 or other known as the Revised Forestry Code of the Philippines, and the Republic Act 7586, the National Integrated Protected Area System of 1992. So it shall also include the sub-classification and zonification of the said areas. So kanisi forest lands and natural parks surveys or protected areas delimitation surveys, i-undertake ni siya usually sa mga survey team sa regional nga DENR, no? Kay or pwede po ang geodetic engineers basta qualified sa ilahang qualifications. So anong kinahanglan pa man siya i-delimit sir ang area sa forest land. So naman gitawag nga kanang easement, no? Easement from the forest lands. So dapat within the gikan sa boundary sa katong na-establish or na-delimit na nga boundary sa forest lands, dapat na-apply pila ka meters, like for example 20 meters if I'm not mistaken. So 20 meters from that boundaries is dili siya dapat pwede patituluhan or dili siya pwede applyan, no? So na siya for forest lands. Alright, so much for the review of the general concepts for general surveying. Let's go now to the part 2 of this topic, which is the geodetic surveying concepts and principles. So let's recall first the two general classification of the surveys, which is the geodetic surveys and plane surveys. So ato na discuss sa part 1 of this topic. So let's differentiate. Now, what are the differences between these two classification of surveys? In geodetic surveying, again, take account niya ang true shape of the earth, and also it employs the principles of geodesy. And in geodetic surveying, it is a highly precise survey. So in geodetic surveying, the line joining any two station is considered spherical. So may tag-spherical, ang iyang sides and ang iyang sides are angles, and also ang iyang forma is curved siya, no? It's because it takes into consideration the spherical shape. And the triangle formed by any 3 points is considered spherical. Spherical siya kay na curvature. And the angles of triangle are considered spherical. And it is extended over the large areas. So dako siya coverage ang kaning geodetic surveying. Ang iyang output data are great of importance in furnishing precise points of reference to which multitude of surveys of lower precision may be tied. So ang output ng geodetic surveying, like for example ang geodetic control station na iyang mabuhat is kato na pud siya ang mahimong basis sa katong lower areas or lower accuracy ng mga areas, like for example isolated surveys, no? So iyang output maigay mo tong tie point, no? Tie point sa other kinds of surveys nga lower ang precision. Meanwhile, in plane surveying, the means of surface of the earth is considered as a plane. So flat lang gid siya. And its spheroidal and ellipsoidal shape is being neglected. And again, curvature of the earth in plane surveying is being ignored. And the line joining two stations is considered to be straight. Straight lang siya, line lang siya. And the triangle formed by any 3 points is considered as a plane. Normal lang nga triangle, at dili pareha sa katong geodetic nga spherical siya, na curvature. And the angles of triangle are considered plane angles. Plane angles lang siya. And unlike sa geodetic surveying, plane surveying is carried out over small areas, such as for example, less than 250 square kilometers lang siya. Kaya nga naman, pag ma-extend pa siya into other areas, syempre na siya curvature. So, hindi na siya applicable ang plane surveying. So, this is the example of the illustration. No? Kung ato siyang i-differentiate ang geodetic and ang plane survey. So, as you can see in this picture, ang horizontal plane or ang plane of line of equal elevation sa plane survey is ang kanang violet, and ang kanang green mo na siya ang line of equal elevation sa geodetic survey. So differentiate naman siya dayon, no? And these are the objectives of geodetic surveys: to establish a system of points fixed in horizontal station, height, and gravity which can form the basis for less precise surveys. For example, ang iyang less precise surveys, ang topographic, cadastral, and engineering surveys. So, ang ilahang type point ani nga mga surveys is from the output of geodetic surveys. And this system of points consists of geodetic control network. So, wala kung diyon kaganina, output sa geodetic surveys. Second objective is to assist in combination with gravity and with satellite and other extraterrestrial observation, such as astronomical observation and GNSS observations, to become more precise. Okay, syempre, siya may mahimong type point of the lower accuracies ng mga survey, so it must be highly precise. So, siya aid na siya with GNSS observations. So, in determining the size and shape and density distribution of the Earth and in investigation of geophysical phenomena of the Earth such as tectonic plate movement, polar motion, etc. So, it's because kani nga mga phenomena is need na siya og precise na nga measurement. Kaya syempre, tectonic plate movement, ginagmay na kay na siya nga measurement pero ma-detect na siya. It's because higher order na siya nga accuracy ang geodetic surveys. And these geodetic surveys that are primarily employ satellite and physical geodesy concepts. So, mo na akong giingon ganina sa katong differentiation na si geodetic surveys employs the idea or the knowledge about geodesy. So, let's go now to the problems of geodetic surveying. So, ano na may problems sa geodetic surveying, sir? So, again, ato nang ma-discover diri ang discussion. So again, geodetic surveying outputs serve as a primary control on which other surveys are being based. No, sa ako pang gibalik, ako pang balik-balikon na ang output sa geodetic surveying may mahimong basis, may mahimong reference to the other lower precision na mga surveys such as topographic, isolated, and so on and so forth. So ang problem there is it has no superior survey control network to tie into. So since kay siya ang first, wala siya ka referan. So, muna yung isa ka problem sa geodetic surveying. Another is, it covers a large areas of Earth's surface. So, kung dako na gani ang coverage sa area, so, nanadjud na yung mga barriers or nanadjud na yung mga problems na ma-encountered such as communication sa between persons na nag-execute aning survey. Another problem is extreme care must be taken in both the measurement and calculation of the geodetic survey. Again, since siya ang pinakauna, ang output ani niya is ang pinakauna nga control networks nga mahimong reference into lower precise na mga survey. So dapat extreme ang care, mas maingat pa sa maingat, no? Kay small lang ni mga error, dako na siya og impact, no? And because large distances are covered, care must be taken also to reduce a minimum the sources of systematic errors in the observation. So manya kung giga ganina sa lagyo man kay siya, so again care must be taken to reduce para kung mas careful ka sa imong gibuhat sa processes, so mas precise ang imong output. So here is the simple illustration on one of the problems of geodetic surveying. So it shows in the picture that here is a triangle over a sphere and a triangle over a plane. So let us assume that the three angles of an equilateral triangle with sides that is equal to 20 km were observed. So again, so from point A daw to point B is 20 km. So since kay equilateral man siya, so equal ang B to C and C to A. And over a sphere, the sum of these three angles should not be equal to 180 degrees. Okay, it's because kung spherical ang imuhang gamiton, so spherical triangle, the interior angles is not must not be equal to 180 degrees unless kung in a plane. Pag in a plane, equal dyan na siya to 180 degrees. And this is due to the presence of what we call spherical excess. And over a plane, the excess in 180 degrees will be interrupted as an error. So, mo ni siya ang isa ka problems in geodetic surveying, kaya it's because we need to determine this spherical excess para ma-account to siya and ma-distribute ang error para mas precise ang imuhang makuha na information. And hence, we must take care, extreme care must be taken, and proper methods and procedures must be applied in conducting of surveys over a large areas and that involve long distances. So kinahanglan siya kung ano spherical excess, distribute the error para makakuha ta og more accurate na data. So here is the general operations involved in geodetic surveying. So we have first phase is the planning part, next is the field works, and lastly is the computations. So sa diri nga part, sa imong makita sa right side is the sample of the overview of the operations involved in geodetic surveying. So I guess that's it for now, and see you for the upcoming videos of this topic. Keep safe everyone, and see you in our next video.